Hey everybody, Maxwell here with Helpmeclose.com. Got a special treat for you today. So just the other day, I've been thinking about where I can improve in my sales and my presentations to help me close more deals. One area that I wanted to focus on was how I could ask more thoughtful questions, better questions, because I'm sure, like you, there's those times where I go into these appointments or I'm cold calling and I'm asking questions because I'm told to do that. Or sometimes I feel like I'm just asking questions for the sake of asking questions. I decided to reach out to my dear friend, Deb Calvert, who is a master on asking questions, so much so that she even wrote the book on how to ask good sales questions. It's right here. It's called Discover Questions. It's a fantastic read. I recommend you getting yourself a copy. So if you don't know Deb, she's definitely somebody that you're going to want to start following. I'll leave information about how you can find her in the show notes. I also want to mention that she does have this awesome initiative over on brighttalk.com. It's called the Sales Experts Channel, where she's gotten over 50 different sales experts to collaborate together to develop videos and training for those of us in sales. So it's an incredible resource that you're going to want to check out. Be sure to subscribe to those videos because they are just loaded with value. So yeah, I gave Deb a call and she was kind enough to give me lots of time, and we had a great conversation on how as salespeople we can ask better questions, and we went through a whole list of what kind of questions to ask. So be sure to stay tuned, check it out, get out your notebook. You're really going to want to take notes here. Tons and tons of value. Here is my private conversation with Deb Calvert. Enjoy. How you doing today, Deb?
I'm doing good. I am really excited to be here with you and all the closers who are following you, and this is just going to be fun. I'm always enjoying a conversation with you.
Likewise. Just for those who are listening and watching as well, I've got to interact with Deb a handful of times, and every time it has been a great joy. She is the queen of questions, so much so that she's actually even written the book on questions. And one of my favorite things about you, Deb, is that every time we have a conversation and you're asking me questions, I find that your questions actually end up teaching me more about myself.
Ooh, well, there's a tall standard. Let's see if we can fit that into this conversation. Yeah, I actually even have a crown for being the queen of questions. And had I been planning ahead, I might have decided to bring that with me to hide some of the frizz today. We have a little humidity today.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe next time in the future we'll have to do another one and bring that crown out. So diving into the topic of questions, because it's undoubtedly important that in sales we can ask good questions. You called your book Discover Questions. What does that mean? Why did you pick that title?
Well, it's a funny thing. You're not supposed to settle on a book title before you write a book. But I not only decided on the title before I wrote the book, I decided it halfway into the research. But I made a mistake. I wanted to have this thing called discovery questions because of the part of the sales process that's so commonly called the discovery phase. Mm-hmm. So I knew, I was in this research, I did it for 20 years, I knew that there were a limited number of purposes that people ever ask questions. And I thought, well, we'll make an acronym to have a different letter represent each one of the purposes that people ask questions. So I was bound and determined that I would find 9 of them, and I'd have the word discovery. And that was kind of working out for a while until I got stuck, and there were only 8, and I kept searching for 5 years. I searched for the last one, and then one day I went, oh, wait, discover's a word too. Maybe it's just 8. And that's true. So now 24 years later, I'm still convinced there are only 8 purposes that people ever ask questions, and each purpose is represented by one of the letters in Discover.
Okay. So the Discover is actually an acronym for the types of questions that you recommend salespeople ask.
It's not just the types I recommend they ask, but the 8 purposes in all of life, not just sales, but there are only 8 reasons, I think, that we as humans ever ask somebody else a question.
Okay. And so let's dive right in. What are those 8 reasons?
Okay, we'll go from the top, right, straight down the acronym. There are 4 of these that are going to sound very familiar because in sales, we've used these before. 3 that everybody will know, 1 more that most people will know. And that means that half of these are purposes of questions nobody in sales has really understood or heard about before. So we're going to double your cadre of questions right off the bat.
Perfect.
Yeah, the D is easy. Everybody asks data questions. In fact, we probably ask too many data questions. The purpose of a data question is just what it sounds like. It's to get to a fact, to understand something that is proven. It's not subjective. It's actually a fact. And the reason I say maybe we ask too many of these is because that's what buyers say. So this 20 years of research is not just field-based with sellers. I've also interviewed over 10,000 buyers about these questions. And so out of the 8, data, those are the ones that are kind of boring. They know that sellers have to gather information, but buyers get impatient if we do one after another, and it begins to feel like an interrogation of questions for that reason.
So sounds like data questions are kind of like almost qualifying questions that we tend to ask at the very beginning. Would you agree with that? Or
They do tend to be. There also are safe questions. So sometimes in a needs assessment process, I see sellers going to data questions because they feel very safe asking those. Maybe I don't need to know to qualify you, for example, how many businesses, how many locations you have, or I don't need to know what year you were founded. But these are the questions that are engaging enough that I feel like I'm fulfilling what I should by asking questions, but they're just not engaging enough to the buyer to build trust and really cause us to advance the sale with each other.
Okay. So from D, we go to I. What's I?
Now, I is an issue question.
Okay.
And out of the 8, it's the only one that's about us. All the others themselves are about the other person, the buyer. An issue question is it's about surfacing an issue or addressing an issue. So it could be proactive to surface it and deal with something before it becomes bigger than it needs to be. Or it's reactive. You've told me there's a problem, and instead of dodging that conversation, I'm now going to open up that conversation. Make it okay for you to share all the blowback with me because I'd rather you vent it and I understand it so I can deal with it, because that is building our trust and rapport too.
Okay.
Of course, the proactive is a smarter strategy. I like to use this with longtime customers as a service check. So I might say, hey, Maxwell, we've been doing business together for a couple of years. Anything that you'd like to see me doing differently that would help you out? And it's just a simple way to get issues surfaced and dealt with.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about S? What do we got here?
Powerful. The S stands for solution. It's really powerful because so few sellers use this kind of a question. So let me take a little time to explain this one. A solution question is anything that is intended to get alternatives on the table. I'm not telling them to you. I'm not suggesting them. Instead, I'm planting little seeds for you to think about them and for me to get the early read on how you might feel. Okay, so that would sound something like this. It would be, hey, Maxwell, what are your thoughts about, and I introduce an idea or a nuance. What are your thoughts about having service be accelerated so that your delivery be accelerated so that you could implement this right away? Now I know what's your value around it. I know your reaction to. Maybe I say something like, tell me what your competitors are doing to solve the same problem. And you're giving me the answers, and I'm planting little seeds in the back of your mind just to begin thinking about the thing I might later on pose to you as a solution.
So I've heard, just as I've looked around at different sales trainings and things like that, I've heard that a lot of times when you ask these questions, you try to not force, but guide them to a positive answer. Would you agree with that and say that's true? Or?
Yeah, it's a very fine line. I'm opposed, because of what buyers tell me, I'm opposed to oversteering your buyer. If you walk into your sales call, especially a needs assessment call, and your intention is to back your buyer up into a corner, the one that you've already predetermined you want to put them into, that intent's going to come through. And when that intent comes through and it begins to feel like you're manipulating them, or you're using questions as a weapon to cause them to go where you already want them to go, you lose the authenticity and you lose the promise that you might have made them that you'd like to ask questions to understand what their needs are. So yes, on guiding and leading and helping your buyers to see things in new ways, but watch it so you don't end up using questions that sound very, very forced, as if you're trying to use them as a trick to get people someplace.
Yeah. So I really want to dive more on this, because I admit, like, for me, myself, I feel like this is something that I struggle with. I feel that sometimes when I'm meeting with a potential buyer and I'm trying to do a solution question, I kind of feel like I'm almost trying to guide them or lead them into a certain answer. And one of two things will happen. One, either the question will just go right over their head and they won't answer it in a way that I was expecting, or not answer it at all. And so I find like it's tricky doing this. So how can the people who are watching, how can they put into practice more solution questions that are going to yield the type of results that would benefit both them and then also their customers?
Yeah, it starts with your intention. So a solution question, sure, it can be you're getting very close to wanting to present a solution. Absolutely, it can be what you're describing. I recommend making it open in the way that you phrase the question and also in your own mind. So what are your thoughts about is very different from asking, do you want to, or have you thought about? Because that channels somebody into a narrow place, and maybe you don't want them to think too narrowly at this point. What do you think about begins to cause them to think about it. And it begins to get them to answer something very loose. So that's open. What do you think about? Closed is a little bit more like, have you considered? No, I haven't considered that. It's kind of an ending point. It's more of a closed off. And do you really want them to go there? Okay. If your intention is to really just get their gut reaction, so you know how big of an objection later that you might be dealing with or not. If your intention is to truly just begin to get their ideas flowing and to start some brainstorming, which is a very powerful strategy, then you've got to keep this question and your own mind really wide open. So make it as open as you want it to be. Hey, let's brainstorm. Let's think about 3 things that you've seen others do, or let's talk about 3 ideas that maybe neither of us has really gone very deep into, and let's talk about the pros and cons of those. Whatever your strategy, be sure that you're making it as open or as closed as you want it to be, and make that fit align with where you are in your process.
Yeah. And one of the I would say troubles that I've run into when I've tried to, with this strategy is I'll have a prospect give me a call. Maybe I've left them a flyer or they've been referred to me, and they already kind of know my product, or they think they know my product. They think they know my solution. I go in there to talk about it and to ask them questions, and sometimes they just don't even want me to ask these types of questions. They're like, hey, just give me a demo. Just show me this, or how much does it cost?
Yes.
What advice would you give in those types of situations to where, me as the salesperson, I can still build value by asking questions and show my integrity and honesty, wanting to learn the business, even though, they kind of want to run the show?
Yeah. Oh boy, let me unpack that, because there's so much good stuff in what you just said. Okay, so let me start at the end. The first thing is you just said the magic word. This is not about asking a solution question. If they've already got their focus on a solution and they think they know what that solution is, you're going to get a barrier. So don't bother with the solution question.
Okay.
A better question is the one that you said, which is you want to know what they value. So it's going to be a value question, or V in the Discover acronym.
Okay.
Back to that. The other really important thing that I don't want to let slip by us here is, you're right. Buyers have all these resources. Some we give them, our website, a flyer, a previous voicemail that we left. Some they find on their own. A person is using a similar service, or they have a need, and so they've been researching on their own for a long time. Whatever it is, by the time they come to us and agree to meet with us, they often think they know everything there is to know. They're so far through their own buying process. They don't know what they don't know, and that's the sad part, right? Because they think they know more than they do. So we got to open that back up, and a value question is the way to do that. And I can jump ahead if you want me to go straight to the V and talk about that, or we can come back to it.
Let's go C, and then we'll get to the V there. So yeah, let's move on to the next one because I'm excited to get to those. But what's C?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about C and O together because they often do travel together, and they're the other two, like data. These are the other two that are really familiar to most salespeople already. C is for consequence, the O is for outcome, and so think about questions. The outcome is hopes, dreams, plans, goals, visions of the future. Anytime you're asking a goal question, that's an outcome question.
Okay.
The reason I say it partners really nicely with the consequence question is that, intentional or not, we often put them together, and it's smart to do so. You tell me your goal, I follow up with a consequence question. Okay, so your goal is to XYZ. What happens if you don't reach the goal? That's a consequence question. Anything that's going to elevate the pain, help you to see the risk of inaction, help you to understand the consequences of going the wrong way with it, magnifying the contrast between where you want to be and what happens if you don't reach that. That's the way that you use those together.
Okay. So now value questions. Let's get into it.
My personal favorite, because it is something that can turn a sale. And the reason it can turn a meeting or a sale is because nothing ever causes us to act more than what we value. Okay. So I need to know what you value. And it's not price. Sure, that might be a factor in your decision, but ultimately the thing you care about most is almost always, 99% of the time, it's something besides price. So what is it? And how big is it? And why is it? So they come to you and they say, I'm thinking about your solution. This is what I want to do. Give me a price. Okay. I would like to give you a price. I need a little more information. Let me start by asking you, why is this the one that you want? What's important about this one to you? What do you value about this solution? Okay. Now you're giving me some information. And I can figure out by asking one or two value questions, how big a deal is this to you? Is it just something that you're supposed to get on the phone and make some phone calls for your boss about and you could care less? Or is it something that's really compelling and your job's on the line because you need to perform? And within that answer that you give me, now I understand a little bit more about how I'm going to position price and everything else that I say.
Sure. So can you give me some more examples of specific value questions that you've asked in your career?
You bet. So anytime I hear more than one goal, more than one outcome that somebody's looking for, I ask, out of these, which is most important to you? And even then, I go one step further. So you've told me three things. You've told me this is the most important thing of those three. Is there anything else we haven't talked about that matters even more? See, I really want to get to the heart of what you value. If I don't, here's what happens. Somebody else, some other seller, some competitor can come in and swoop in and steal this sale from me because they do speak to the thing that matters most. We are adrenaline flowing in a sales moment. We make a mistake, and that is the first need that a buyer tells us, we pounce on it.
Yeah.
And then we're left wondering, well, okay, I met the need. How come they went with somebody else? And it's a mystery.
Yeah.
Because we never knew what they really valued most.
No, absolutely. And then speaking of, I think it's really important here, if you are selling to multiple decision makers, that you are able to find out what each decision maker truly values, because it might not be the same. So I think that's really important as we are, for those who are making more complex sales.
I agree, and those numbers are pretty scary. I heard 5.4 just 2 years ago. Now it's 7.9, something like that, the number of decision makers in a complex sale, especially in tech. And that means every single one of them has something different that they value. I need to not only know the criteria, that's actually in our question, but I need to know not only the criteria of the group's decision, but I need to know the individual value and weight of the value for everybody I'm talking to.
So, yeah, and while we're on the topic of working with multiple decision makers, being the queen of questions, what question would you ask when you're trying to find out who is the decision maker? Because this can be tricky. You don't want to offend somebody. If you're working with a store and you're talking to the manager, you don't want to be like, "Are you the decision maker?" You're questioning their authority, which can sometimes be offensive. So, how have you found, or do you have any suggestions for the closers? How can we find out who the decision maker is and not offend anybody?
Yeah, first of all, I would never ask that question. I completely agree with one of your other recent guests, Jeb Blount, who says that's the one question you don't ask. You don't say, "Are you the decision maker?" People are embarrassed to say no. So why would we put them on the spot? And frankly, what do you even mean by decision maker?
Yeah.
So it's just too easy to say yes, and then later on we're burned by it. So instead of that one, if you get into that moment where you wonder if you're talking to all the right people, you ask it a little differently. You make it very natural for them to give you information. You say something like, okay, who else is going to have any decision authority here? Who else is going to influence this decision? Who else do we need to make sure understands everything that we're talking about? Let's get the full list.
What about, so I noticed right there, you're starting with the who else. What if I were to say something like, is there anybody else? Is there someone else that needs to be involved? Is that an appropriate question, or would that question push them away?
It could. It's too easy. So I like open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are an invitation and an expectation both. If I say who else, it's as if I expect, of course, there are other people. If I say, is there anyone else? It's just too easy for you to give the first answer. No, you don't think, but the who else makes you think a little bit. Here's a trainer trick. And so watch for this the next time you're in a training session with anyone. See if they use this. At the end of a particular part of the training, a module or a unit of the training, really strong facilitators almost always say, what questions do you have for me? They don't say, do you have any questions? And it's this very same subtle psychological thing that we're signaling to people. I expect you to have a question, so I'm positioning it this way. What questions do you have for me? And then I pause. Who else is involved in the decision? And then I pause. I've told you I expect there to be other people, and you want to meet my expectation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just because I know that in my experience, I've worked with some other cultures in different parts of the world, and specifically in one of these cultures that I'm thinking of, they're taught and trained not to ask questions. So in a classroom setting, if you ask, hey, do you have any questions? No one wants to raise their hand. Nobody wants to ask the question, even though they really have no idea what's going on. So by wording it that way, it really does flip the script and can help lead to more answers and really finding out true problems, true concerns, and most importantly, what they value. So I think that's a great point.
We can't let efficiency get in our way of effectiveness. It's efficient to say, is there any other decision maker? Quick question, quick answer. It hurts us in the long run, though, because it wasn't effective in getting what we needed to get to.
Absolutely. So the next one's E. What are the E questions?
Another one that is seldom asked, and buyers love it. This is the one out of all 8 that gets people talking the most. So be prepared. If you ask an E question, you're going to get a long answer. And that's good. Well, if that's what you want. But be prepared. Like with all these questions, I think you need to be very purposeful and know what it is that you're going after. E stands for example. What I'm trying to get from you with an E question is a story, maybe a contrast. I want you to be thinking about something so that it becomes more real, more tangible to you. And this is especially important for any sellers who can't do a demo, a hands-on demo. If you're selling something that's a little bit more nebulous or conceptual, then an E question is going to serve you particularly well. An example question does the work that's equivalent to when you go on a used car lot of any type, and they're eager to put you behind the wheel of the car to take a test drive. That's because the experience itself is going to help you to want to magnify your desire for that particular product. Okay. well, I don't have a car for you to test drive in what I sell. It's more conceptual, but I need you to be able to envision it. I need you to be able to see yourself in it and to begin to have some of the sensory response to it. The question has to trigger that.
Yeah, I love doing that. I used to, so when I was early in my career, I at one point was doing door-to-door alarm sales. And so one of the questions that I would ask as I was going door-to-door is, I would be talking about our product, the different types of alarms, and I would specifically ask them, okay, if you were designing your home security system, what doors would you be placing alarms, or on what windows would you be placing it? Because then they started thinking it, they started taking ownership, and it was their system now that they were designing. And if I could get someone to show me all the doors and windows that they wanted, the different security features, that's when I knew. I was like, okay, this person is, they're ready to buy, because
you are so on top of this. You've got this. So yeah, you just described. So a perfect way to use an example question is to engage the buyer, to draw them in, not just their sensory experience, but also this other piece, which is getting them to participate in creating what they want. Because that's buy-in. That's just not you going for the buy. That's for you going for that deep level buy-in that makes them compelled to say yes to whatever it is that they themselves are creating. I call it the Chipotle Effect, right?
Explain that. What does that mean? What's the Chipotle? Okay. Why Chipotle?
So the restaurant Chipotle, they charge more for a burrito than a lot of places do. And then they had all that bad press, and despite that bad press, their sales continue to climb. And their business model is so good that they're now also opening a burger chain that has the same model. And the model is this. You go in and you walk down the line and you create in that exact moment what is for you the perfect burrito. A few more beans, a little less on the sour cream. By the way, could I have that red salsa too? You're making it. It's whatever your mood is directing you to ask for in that moment. And there's no burrito that will ever taste as good as the one that suited your mood at that exact point in time. Unlike everybody else's burrito, it's your own. You participated in creating exactly what you wanted.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I'm going to refer to that now instead of example questions as burrito questions.
Okay.
I like it.
I'm going to steal that and use it too then.
Let's move on to R. What's R for?
Okay, so this is the one that rounds out our 4. There are more sellers asking this one than some of the other types. But it's not something that is used often enough, I don't think. The R stands for rationale. I want to know your rationale for making the decision that you've made or the one that you're about to make. And I think this is every bit as important on the front end as the traditional qualifying questions. Tell me, as you're proceeding with decision, what are the criteria that you'll use to make your decision? That's a rationale question. If you've already made a decision and I'm too late, but I want to get in on the game sooner next time, then I'm going to ask you to, hey, walk me through. As you made this decision, what were the steps you took? What was the process for making the decision that you made? Very different from saying, why did you make that decision, which makes people feel like you're questioning them or their intelligence. But walk me through your process so I can understand what led you here.
And I think that's a really valuable question because it'll also give you insights when you're prospecting, when you're cold calling, of how to connect with people in the future. It also will establish more credibility of you as an expert versus you as a salesperson. So I like that. That's a great question.
Buyers like it because it, especially on the front end, it forces them to think. It forces them to begin to crystallize their criteria. And so they often find that to be a very helpful service that you're providing.
Yeah, because a lot of times, they are distracted. Buyers can be very distracted and they don't know what they want. They don't know what they don't know too. So you're helping them map it out. I wanted to ask you, now that we've gone through the acronym of Discover, is there any particular order that salespeople should be, following as they're asking these types of questions? That is there an order that you've seen to be most effective, I guess, versus just
I'm actually anti-order. So unlike a lot of question models out there, which I think get in the way, the right order is the one that comes naturally. And that's going to depend on you being able to truly listen to and stay in the moment with your buyer.
Mm-hmm.
I do think so. If I have to say there's an order at all, data questions are easy. They're expected. They're tolerated better at the beginning. A couple of them are naturally going to be the way to open most conversations.
Mm-hmm.
How are your sales last month? Might be something you ask even a well-established customer. So you're asking for some data. It's a good starting point. It's safe. It just enters into the rest of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, the question that you ask next should depend on what you really need to know, what you really want to know from the buyer. Don't make it too formulaic. It becomes robotic if you do.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that you understand all 8 purposes so that you can be efficient with your questions. And if you're not getting the information that you want, maybe you need to come to another one of the 8 types of questions. And then just be smart about how you listen, about how you respond, about how you use questions with purpose to advance that sale.
So I like how you said that, with purpose, because I know that there's some companies out there where they'll give their sales employees just a set of questions, almost like a checklist to go through, and sometimes some questions don't apply. So yeah, I like that how you bring that up, that they do have to be purposeful. Mm-hmm. Is there ever a point where you feel like, okay, I'm done asking questions? And how do you recognize that point and when to move on and kind of shift gears?
When you know exactly what the buyer needs most and values most, and when you know how they feel about the solution that you think you'll come back and propose to them, or even in a one-call close, what you're going to propose to them, when you know how they feel about that, and when you know that they have talked enough, that they are moving from awareness and interest and desire to a place where, hey, they're pretty motivated here to take action. Mm-hmm. At that point, it's time for me to move away from a needs assessment and into a solution, whether it's that same meeting or not, where the solution is going to be offered. We're never done with questions, though. So questions, that's when we're done with needs assessment, but I use questions to handle objections. I use questions in negotiations. I use questions in the presentation of a solution. I think questions can serve you well in any conversation and selling, but also any relationship, because it's what makes a two-way dialogue.
Yeah. And I think something that goes really well with questions is listening. Yeah. And I admit, and my wife will, testify to this, sometimes I'm not the best listener. What advice would you give, to help salespeople become better listeners?
Yeah. Get out of your own head. Get confident enough not to stay inside your own head. What we're doing in those adrenaline-fueled moments when we're in a sales situation with a buyer is we're worried so much about, will I look smart? Will I have the right answer? Will I be able to close this? Yeah. And as long as you're asking those questions in your own head, you're missing what the buyer's saying. You're missing what they're conveying to you in both content and in feeling. We're missing the subtle tone of voice changes or the expressions that are coming across on the phone or in person. And we're not nearly as effective if we're not listening as when we are listening. So to truly advance a sale and get to a place where we can close, we've got to let the buyer be heard and be involved. We mess it up if we're trying to do too much of that work in our own mind.
Yeah, because I can definitely relate to that. Not only in selling, but in my day-to-day life, it's very hard sometimes to ask a question and then clear your head enough to let the answer come in. Because sometimes I'll admit, even in doing the shows or YouTube videos, it's sometimes I want to be thinking, hey, what's that next question that I'm going to ask? I don't want to freeze. Mm-hmm. But
would you like a quick tip?
I would love it. I would love it.
It's one that I really like. So there are 3 things that work against us in selling. The first is that our brain is much faster than anybody else can talk, even faster than I can talk. Mm-hmm. Brains process really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. So there's the temptation to fill up the empty space. That's working against us. The second thing working against us is that we are very, very conditioned. We condition ourselves to listen for what's familiar. As soon as we hear the familiar or the thing that we hope to hear, That's when we pounce. That's when we interrupt people. That's when we start to take conversations in a different direction than the speaker was trying to go. And that's when we lose. We lose the traction that we started to gain when we were listening. So the quick tip is related to this second barrier, and that is tell yourself over and over again if you have to. It becomes a habit, so it'll be easier. But tell yourself, I'm here to listen for whatever is different or unexpected. I'm not listening for what's familiar. That's going to come to me anyway. I don't have to do that work. I'm not going to respond to what's familiar. I'm going to wait. I'm going to really force myself to tune in and wait for what's different than what I expect. And it's kind of fun when you get the hang of it to listen for what's different and to not jump into the part that's familiar. And buyers notice, any conversation, practice at home, right? People notice when you're really focused until the different thing comes out.
Absolutely. And also I think that will give salespeople access to the power of silence. I think that's something that sometimes we struggle with. It makes you feel awkward at points, but there's a lot of power in that, of just asking a question and letting that silent, that silence exists while people can process information as well.
Absolutely. It gives you access to the power of questions too, because when you hear something different, you're not at that point going to start talking, you're going to start asking. You want to know more? I don't understand that. So tell me more about that, or why is that, or what about that matters to you? Right? Your natural curiosity forces a question when you're paying attention to what's different.
Awesome. Fantastic. Hey closers, I hope you've been enjoying my conversation with Deb, where we've been diving deep into how we can ask better questions and further assist our buyers in making better informed decisions. If you have found this information valuable, please do me a favor, go ahead and click subscribe to the Help Me Close Sales channel here on YouTube. Also, by doing so, you're going to be notified of when I release new videos, especially when I go ahead and release part 2 of my conversation with Deb, where we talk about some of her most recent research. What Deb has been able to do is get into the minds of our buyers. So she's interviewed literally hundreds of buyers and been asking them what are the top behaviors that you like to see when you are buying from somebody. So in other words, what are the top behaviors of the top salespeople out there? So again, you can see why this would be extremely valuable to you and me, because if we know what our buyers want, we're going to be able to better prepare, make better presentations specifically for them. So go ahead, click subscribe, and I'll see you around, and keep closing.